Yeah, I guess I'll talk about StoryCorps a little bit to start, and we'll talk a little bit later. So, has anybody here participated in StoryCorps? One. Okay. And who knows what has heard StoryCorps on the radio? Okay.
Wow.
Who has no idea what StoryCorps is and waiting for the entertainment to come on? Okay. So, as John said, StoryCorps, I was a public radio producer. John and I started around the same time, and made radio documentaries for many years at public radio. And I did a lot of social justice stuff, and it was insanity. It was spending months and months and months to make a half-hour documentary. Kind of, someone once described it as like carving a statue in a walnut, like just complete nuttiness. And I did a lot of social justice documentaries in prisons and in housing developments and homeless shelters. And, you know, even when we were kids, you know, in those early documentaries like on a death row, you know, when I would interview a guy and talk to him about where he, you know, what his dreams were, what his childhood was like, you know, these guys had never had conversations like that. And I could see that it was important and sometimes transformative in their lives. And I did those documentaries for about 20 years, and then had this crazy idea of StoryCorps, which essentially takes documentary and turns it on its head. Because when we did radio programs, the idea was that you would interview people to create a piece that, you know, entertains or educates or whatever it is, and that's the purpose of it. Millions of people hear this story. But what I wanted to try with StoryCorps was to turn that on its head and say the final product actually doesn't matter. The idea is for as many people as humanly possible to get listened to. So 12 years ago, we set up a booth in Grand Central Terminal in New York where anybody can come. You can bring a parent, you can bring a friend, and you come to this booth, our first booth, and you're met by a facilitator who works for StoryCorps, and you and your grandmother go inside this booth, and the door shuts. You're in like a sound booth. It's completely silent. The lights are low. It's a sacred space. And facilitator's in the corner, and for 40 minutes you're in there, just two microphones, and you and your loved one and the facilitator, and you talk and you listen. And many people think of it as, if I had 40 minutes left to live, you know, what would I say to this person who's so important to me? At the end of the 40 minutes, you get a copy of the interview, and another one goes to the Library of Congress so that your great-great-great-grandkids can get to know your grandmother through her voice and story. So it started out as this kind of crazy experiment, and I actually had no idea what was going to happen. Your psychiatrist thing, yeah, that was there. I was worried about like people killing each other in the booth, like Jerry Springer kind of things happening. I mean, you open up a booth in Grand
That's what you thought of?
Yes.
Jerry Springer?
That was exactly what I thought of, that people would reveal like terrible secrets in the booth and kill each other. That was my fear. But, you know, we started with that one booth, and really at first, a lot of people thought it was an idiotic idea and told me not to do it. And at first, nobody actually came to the booth. Nobody got it. And now, you know, since then, we've now collected about 250,000 people across the country have participated in StoryCorps. It's the largest collection of human voices ever gathered by far. But at the beginning, nobody knew what we were doing. And I just want to play a story from, I don't usually use a clicker, so let's see if I can get this. Oh, did it fall out of my pocket? Here's another one. Okay, so let's go to a very early, let's see. Can we get, there we go. So this is, I'm going to play an early, very, very early week one StoryCorps story that relates to healthcare. This is a couple. Have you heard this one?
Yeah.
John? Okay. So this is a couple who came to the booth week one of StoryCorps, Danny and Annie Perasa. Danny came to StoryCorps to remember his first, they heard about StoryCorps, made an appointment, thick Brooklyn accents, so listen carefully. They wanted to tell the story of their first date that had happened 25 years before. So this is Danny and Annie Perasa telling the story of their first date.
She started to talk, and I said, listen, I'm going to deliver a speech. I said, at the end, you're going to want to go home. I said, you represent a 34-letter word. I said, that word is love. I said, if we're going anywhere, we're going down the aisle because I'm too tired, too sick, and too sore to do any other damn thing. And she turned around and she said, well, of course I'll marry you. And the next morning I called her as early as I possibly could.
And he always gets up early.
to make sure she hadn't changed her mind, and she hadn't. And Every year on April 22nd around 3 o'clock, I call her and ask her if it was today, would she do it again? And so far the answer's been the same.
Yeah, 25 times yes.
You see, the thing of it is, I always feel guilty when I say I love you to you, and I say it so often. I say it to remind you that as dumpy as I am, it's coming from me. It's like hearing a beautiful song from a busted old radio. And it's nice of you to keep the radio around the house.
If I don't have a note on the kitchen table, I think there's something wrong. You write a love letter to me
Well,
every
the only
morning.
thing that could possibly be wrong is I couldn't find a silly pen.
To my princess, the weather out today is extremely rainy. I'll call you at 11:20 in the morning.
It's a romantic weather
And I
report.
love you, I love you, I love you.
When a guy is happily married, no matter what happens at work, no matter what happens in the rest of the day, there's a shelter when you get home. There's a knowledge, knowing that you can hug somebody without them throwing you downstairs and saying, get your hands off me. And being married is like having a color television set. You never want to go back to black and white.
So Danny and Annie came back to the booth many times. Again, we didn't have many people come. We had people, not Danny and Annie. We had one person who came to the booth 200 times. She interviewed everyone she'd ever met. She would pull people off the subway and bring them to the booth. Now when we open up a booth, we have a waiting list of 3,000 people 10 seconds after we open up reservations. But this was a different time. Danny and Annie Danny brought every character he'd ever met. He worked as an OTB clerk. Annie was a nurse. OTB,
off-track
betting in New York,
Yep.
yeah. And so he brought major league umpires and undercover narcotics detectives. And it got to the point where Danny would call us up on a Friday and say, I'm having a cataract operation on Monday. Do you want me to come in on Thursday and document it? And we'd say, sure, what the hell, Danny, whatever you want to do. We'd love to see you. Danny, you can see him here. In the picture. He was, but it's not his kind of full glory. He was 5 feet tall. He had crossed eyes and one snaggle tooth. But Danny Perasa had more romance in his little pinky than all of Hollywood's leading men put together. A couple of years after they recorded this first interview, and they had come back over and over again to read their love letters to each other, Danny was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And we ended up renaming that first booth in Grand Central Terminal that week the Danny and Annie Perasa booth. And the next week, he called us up and he said he was too sick to get back to the booth, but he asked us if we could come to his home in Bay Ridge and record a final interview with Annie. So we did. We went back, and this is the conversation that they had.
The illness is not hard on me. It's just, the finality of it. And him, he goes along like a trooper.
Listen, even downhill, a car doesn't roll unless it's pushed, and you're giving me a great push. The deal of it is, we try to give each other hope, and not hope that I'll live, hope that she'll do well after I pass, hope that people will support her, hope that if she meets somebody and likes him, she marries him.
He has everything planned,
I'm working on it. She said it was her call. She wants to walk out behind the casket alone. I guess that's the way to do it, because when we were married, you know how your brother takes you down, your father takes you down? She said, well, I don't know which of my brothers to walk in with. I don't want to offend anybody. I said, I got a solution. I said, you walk in with me, you walk out with me. And the other day, I said, who's going to walk down the aisle with you behind the casket? To support her. And she said, nobody. I walked in with you alone. I'm walking out with you alone.
Mm-hmm.
There's a thing in life where you have to come to terms with dying. Well, I haven't come to terms with dying yet. I want to come to terms with being sure that you understand that my love for you up to this point was as much as it could be, and it'll be as much as it could be for eternity. I always said the only thing I have to give you is a poor gift, and it's myself. And I always gave it. And if there's a way to come back and give it, I'll do that too. Do you have the Valentine's Day letter there?
Yeah. My dearest wife, this is a very special day. It is a day on which we share our love, which still grows after all these years. Now that love is being used by us to sustain us through these hard times. All my love, all my days, and more. Happy Valentine's Day.
I could write on and on about her. She lights up the room in the morning when she tells me to put both hands on her shoulders so she can support me. She lights up my life when she says to me at night, wouldn't you like a little ice cream? Or would you please drink more water? I mean, those aren't very romantic things to say, but they stir my heart. In my mind, in my heart, there has never been, there is not now, and never will be another Annie.
So Danny and Annie recorded that on a Thursday, and StoryCorps runs on NPR on Fridays. So Friday, a week later, we broadcast that story, and Danny passed away about 2 hours after the broadcast of the story. Danny was a guy who felt like he hadn't been heard a lot in his life. People would make fun of him. He was such a character. They'd laugh at him. Annie got thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of condolence letters from NPR listeners after Danny died, and she actually took them and buried a copy with Danny so he could know how loved he was. And she kept a copy for herself, and still to this day reads one of those letters, and it's nearly 10 years later, reads one of those letters instead of the letter that the love letter she would have gotten from Danny. So that's a foundational StoryCorps story. And I think that Danny and Annie both speak to this, the core idea of StoryCorps, the beauty and the poetry and the grace. And a lot of people in here know that you can find in, the voices of the people all around us when you take the time to listen.
And I think finding the time to do that listening and to hear the things, the nuances that are going to relate to giving people the care that they need and allowing people to ask for the care that they need, I think is one of the chief frustrations in this room. One of the amazing things to me about StoryCorps is that as time went on, people really began to define it. They embraced it much, much more than people like myself who wouldn't necessarily think that I would want to do StoryCorps,
But you're on the. But you have the microphone all the time. I think what the part of the magic of StoryCorps is that the microphone, and this, and this is part of the reason why. Both of us, I think, are in radio. The microphone gives you the license to talk about things you don't normally get to talk about. So you've done it, in so many ways. You've done StoryCorps. But this is really kind of democratizing that and giving everybody the chance to have that conversation. I know in your opening you talked a bit about hospice, and I was talking about this backstage a little bit, and I do think in some ways over the years there's similarities between what happens in hospice and what happens in StoryCorps, and that there's a hospice caregivers talk about the 4 things you want to say before you die, or you want to say to your loved one, or you want to say if you're the person who's sick, is thank you, I love you, forgive me, I forgive you. And I think in many cases what StoryCorps does is give people the chance when they're not actively dying to have that important conversation. And it just, what I like to think every week on the radio is it kind of shakes you on the shoulder and just says, reminds you this is what's important.
Isn't there that other one, though, which is don't open the envelope from Citibank that's on the counter? Yeah, whatever you do. The kinds of things that you've received are humorous and somber and give me a sense of, and let's listen to more, by the way.
Sure.
Of other people and that represent how this has evolved and how this has all surprised you.
Well, we've had 250,000 people participate, as I said, and the amount that we actually put on the air, I saw the figure recently. It's 0.04% of what we record. But we look at every story as equally valuable, and important, sometimes a sacred moment in people's lives. There are just some that make it that are appropriate to share with a larger audience. And I think what's happening in many ways, because of the nature of what's being talked about in the booth, is that we're collecting kind of the wisdom of humanity. It's been the last 12 years has been an amazing experience. I mean, I think if there's one way it's changed me, I think it's made me much more hopeful, which is a strange thing to say given how fucked up the country is right now. But these facilitators who, we've had hundreds of them now, and we have mobile booths that travel the country and booths in different cities, and we work all over the place. And they're bearing witness to these interviews, and every single one of them, when they come off the road, if you ask them what they learned, the first thing they say is that, it's that Anne Frank line, which they say verbatim, even though I don't know if kids these days read Anne Frank. They say, people are basically good. And I think at the beginning of StoryCorps, you could say that there was some kind of a selection bias in who was participating. But at this point, with this number of interviews in 50 states, thousands of cities, every kind of person across the political spectrum, there's got to be truth to that. So it's given me a lot of hope.
So what other examples?
I picked a couple of healthcare pieces. We've done big special initiatives through the years. Our first was with 9/11 families. Everyone who lost a loved one on September 11th is invited to come to StoryCorps and memorialize that person's life, again, in this 40-minute session. We have an African American initiative, which is the largest collection of African American voices ever gathered. And we have a couple of healthcare initiatives. Our first one was with people dealing with memory loss. And one that's going strong right now is called Legacy, which is for people who are facing a life-threatening illness. And this is one of those interviews. This is as you see, Olivia and Will Smith. When Will was 27, after serving in the military, he enrolled in Bowdoin College as a student. But being an older student wasn't the only thing that set him apart from his classmates. He came to school as a single dad with his infant daughter, Olivia, in tow, and they came to StoryCorps to talk about that experience.
I wasn't planning on having you as my roommate. I actually thought that if Bowdoin College knew I had you, they wouldn't let me come to college. So I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. And I got a job working at Staples, cleaning at night. And I had to take you in with me at work sometimes and hide you in the closet. I think I lost something like 27 pounds just from stress and not eating because I didn't have enough for both of us. My basketball teammates were my first babysitters. I just remember coming from class, and there were 4 giant guys, and then there was this 18-month-old who was tearing up the room.
Were you ever embarrassed bringing me to class, or just having me in general?
I felt a little awkward, but never embarrassed. There were times when the only way I could get through was to come in and look at you and see you sleeping and then go back to my studies. And my graduation day from Bowdoin is a day I'll never forget. All of my classmates, they stood up and gave me the only standing ovation.
I remember walking up with you and having my head in your shoulder.
Yeah, the dean called both of our names as he presented us with the diploma.
So technically I already graduated from college.
Nice try. The degree only has my name on it, so you still gotta go.
I really admire your strength.
But I draw my strength from you. I always have, and I still do.
So Will had just been diagnosed with colon cancer when he had that interview with Olivia, and he passed away earlier this year.
Get out. You're kidding me. Oh, this is one of my favorite stories.
Yeah.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
That's the one thing all of us are going to, no doctor is ever going to fix that. We're all going to go at some point, and that's one of the, pieces of StoryCorps, I think, reminding us how precious every moment is, and that, every day is a day that should be embraced. There's so much, you think about it, there's just so much nonsense and bullshit and so many distractions, and I just think it's, what this is a space to just reflect on what's important.
But everyone in this room, I think, particularly in the talk about health coaches earlier, you can imagine what if you suspected, if you were, say, the health counselor, the health coach on the Bowdoin campus, and you knew that there was this guy who was a single dad who had this, you could imagine intervening as a healthcare coach to support, even though he was keeping it a secret, you would want to be in that space, right? I mean, this is a place where you'd want to, you'd see a story like that and you'd go, oh, I want to be helpful. You wouldn't want to take over. You wouldn't want to get the child away from the dad, but those are the kinds of things that a story, it becomes an opportunity for some of these people out here who are looking for that ability to respond to patient-driven needs,
Sure.
which you never hear about when you just take a history.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the things I've been thinking about a little bit is the idea of using StoryCorps, you know, in a medical setting, giving. Actually, I just kind of thought of this backstage when I was talking to some folks that, you know, imagine families doing a StoryCorps interview with someone who is in a hospital, and that becoming part of the, you know, the patient record, so that everybody on their team could get to know who this person was as a human being, what they cared about, what their dreams were, where they came from, and what they were hoping for.
You know, I always use this conference as an opportunity to do something that scares me, you know, that I would never do in New York, or I'd be too nervous about. And, you know, I do various things up on stage. But this year, I Xeroxed some of my piano music, and I went in. There's pianos all over the Mayo Clinic, and there's a particular piano, a beautiful Bosendorfer that's downstairs at Gonda, and I sat there and I played the piano, and I thought of you because people came over to the piano, and if I had been more solicitous, they would have sat there and told stories. They would have just. And I could see you just setting up a StoryCorps booth right next to the piano. I'd be playing Mozart, and you'd be ushering people into the booths, and they'd tell stories. I mean, it's a completely natural setting.
Well, you know, absolutely. And, you know, in general, I mean, I think one of the lessons of StoryCorps is that people want to be heard. And I think what happens in the booth is that it reminds people that they matter and that they won't be forgotten. And that's so important to all of us. I can't believe how much time has gone by. I know. I'm going to play one last story.
Let's do another one.
So this is, I'm just going to play. So we've started animating some StoryCorps stories. This is one of them.
From a scale of 1 to 10, do you think your life would be different without animals?
I think it would be an 8 without animals because they add so much pleasure to life.
How else do you think your life would be different without them?
I could do without things like cockroaches and snakes.
Well, I'm okay with snakes as long as they're not venomous or like can constrict you or anything.
Yeah, I'm not a big snake person.
But cockroach is just the insect we love to hate.
Yeah, it really is.
Have you ever felt like life is hopeless?
When I was a teenager, I was very depressed. And I think that can be quite common with teenagers who think a lot, you know, and are perceptive.
Am I like that?
You were very much like that.
Do you have any mortal enemies?
I would say my worst enemy is sometimes myself, but I don't think I have any mortal enemies.
Have you ever lied to me?
I probably have, but I try not to lie to you, even though sometimes the questions you ask make me uncomfortable.
Like when we go on our walks, some of the questions I might ask.
Yeah, but you know what? I feel it's really special that you and I can have those kind of talks, even if sometimes I feel myself blushing a little bit.
Have you ever thought you couldn't cope with having a child?
I remember when you were a baby, you had really bad colic, so you would just cry and cry.
What's colic?
It's when you get this stomach ache and all you do is scream for like 4 hours.
Even louder than Amy does?
You were pretty loud, but Amy's was more high-pitched.
I think it feels like everyone seems to like Amy more, like she's like the perfect little angel.
Well, I can understand why you think that people like Amy more, and I'm not saying it's because of your Asperger's syndrome, but being friendly comes easily to Amy. Whereas I think for you, it's more difficult. But the
Yeah,
people who
like-
take the time to get to know you love you so much.
Like Ben or Eric or Carlos.
Yeah.
And like I have better quality friends but less quantity.
I wouldn't judge the quality, but I think...
I mean, like, first day it was like Amy loved Claudia, then she hated Claudia, she loved Claudia, then
you know
she
what?
hated Claudia.
Part of that's a girl thing, honey. The important thing for you is that you have a few very good friends, and really that's what you need in life.
Did I turn out to be the son you wanted when I was born? Like, did I meet your expectations? And
You've exceeded my expectations, sweetie, because, you know, sure, you have these fantasies of what your child's going to be like, but you have made me grow so much as a parent because you think...
well, I was the one who made you a parent.
You were the one who made me a parent, that's a good point. But also because you think differently from, you know, what they tell you in the parenting books.
Yeah.
I really had to learn to think out of the box with you. And it's made me much more creative as a parent and as a person. And I'll always thank you
And
for
that helped when Amy was born.
And that helped when Amy was born, but you are just so incredibly special to me. And I'm so lucky to have you as my son.
You know, there's a quote that I heard a while ago from a nun in Philadelphia. I actually heard it because Mr. Rogers used to carry it around in his wallet. And her name's Mary Lou Kanacki. She's still alive. And she said, it's impossible not to love someone whose story you've heard. And in some ways, could be the motto of StoryCorps. And I know that a lot of people in this room have heard a lot of stories. As healthcare professionals, I encourage you all to keep listening and to keep loving your patients, because that's what it's all about. And I really appreciate you having me here.
Oh, well, let me just give you a sense of
I see I'm at the
reaction
000
is.
time. You're not going to
I'm
throw
the
me off
boss.
the stage?
I'm the boss. Of
Okay,
this.
good.
I'm the boss.
All right, let's.
Yeah.
Well, I have about
I'm running this
8
show.
more hours of stories to play.
Yeah, I know you do. And you know, we should get you back here, and we can do something in the theater in the evening, and you know, just people would stay for hours and hours after hearing the StoryCorps stories. All right, great. We'll have to get a sponsor for you. I know, because StoryCorps needs support, and you can go to the StoryCorps website and both download the app to do the StoryCorps experience yourself at home, and also to contribute to the.
And that is so. That's a big innovation. Since this is kind of an innovation conference over the last year, we did develop an app with the TED Prize, which makes it possible to record stories any place, anytime, on your phone, and with one tap, upload it to the Library of Congress. And we would love to have you guys use this. Yeah,
absolutely. After hearing the StoryCorps stories, I want to mention a film at the Rochester Public Library this evening at 6:30. It's Whose Life Is It Anyway? It's a 1981 movie about a paralyzed artist who is allowed to die. Very interesting, absolutely. What is the process of getting people to open up and share their stories? How can all of this inform healthcare professionals trying to get patients to open up? What stands in the way of that intimacy and honesty in a healthcare setting, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think what we learned from StoryCorps is that, well, you know, look, it's a little bit of a different. It's different than the healthcare setting because it's two people who care about each other having this conversation. But, you know, when I was used to make radio documentaries, I thought there was something like important and magical about me doing the question asking, that like these documentaries wouldn't happen if I wasn't there. And in the first day of StoryCorps, I learned that I was completely wrong. It had nothing to do with me, and everyone's capable of asking these questions. And I think it's just about, you know, it's just what happens in the StoryCorps booth is that people are listening deeply and really paying attention, and that's all it takes. I mean, people really want to be heard. I don't think there's really any barrier. The barrier lies with the person who's doing the listening, not with the person who's doing the talking.
So my journalistic career, I set out to be a swashbuckling foreign correspondent, and you set out to prove that, in fact, you're completely irrelevant.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And
I mean, there must be
we both succeeded.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So. Yeah, me in a different way. Yeah. I mean, there must be like just acreage in heaven for you, David. I have to say, there's a level of humility that I can't even imagine, and I'll think about all the way home. Dave, you say this makes you hopeful. Did you have an emotional curve similar to the learning curve? For instance, you began with sadness, which then developed into hopefulness. Someone trying to psychoanalyze you. That's a Terry Gross kind of a question.
No, I mean, I think that, I think that, these don't make me sad. And, StoryCorps stories, like a lot of people talk about StoryCorps stories, like, making them cry. Like, I'm sure with the Takeaway, there's like a line that everybody says, Takeaway does this to me. And with
Turn off the
StoryCorps
radio.
stories, stop.
No, they don't.
And with StoryCorps making people cry, and every story makes people cry, whether it's funny, or not silly, and I think that's because we're surrounded by so much nonsense, that when you hear someone speaking authentically, it's the opposite of reality TV. No one comes to get rich, no one comes to get famous. It's an act of generosity and love. And when you hear stories told like this, and the ones we select are often they're always regular people who are kind of living life in a way that we all should be living life. You're kind of walking on holy ground, and I think that's what makes it emotional for people. So I have always, even when I did radio documentary work, I think that there's, that I just felt like I was doing something. I wasn't focused on myself. Here's another hospice thing a little bit. One of the mottos at StoryCorps is something that I know that people in hospice work talk about in meetings, that it's not about you. So I wasn't really, I wasn't focused on my own feelings about the stories. I was just trying to get them out there to the public. But the hopefulness is something that did evolve over time. I think it was always there, but it was reinforced over time, and it's a curve that continues, because it hasn't been proven wrong yet.
So would you say that when you're being interviewed by your doctor, okay, about whatever, if you're having a checkup or something like that, and
this is a question I can tell you that I've never been asked before.
I'm sure.
I've been asked a lot of questions.
Yeah. No, I'm sure you've never been asked this.
Okay.
Do you think because of your work, you're more inclined to open up and tell a lot? No.
No, not at all.
No. So you're.
No.
So the booth is locked when the doctor's talking to you.
No, if the doctor is, if the doctor's paying attention, then you want to talk to them, and if they're not, you don't.
So you've had various experiences there.
Well, sure, haven't we all?
Yeah. But that is the value of that medical experience, is when you know that the doctor is paying attention to you.
Sure.
And really tuned into what's going on with you.
Yeah, I think, yeah. But obviously because of the, the complexities of the system, it's not always possible. But I guess that's for you guys to figure out how to make how to make people feel that they're being heard.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Yeah.
We're working on it. What are your thoughts on Humans of New York, the Humans of New York initiative? How many of you know about Humans of New York? Yeah.
It's great. I know Brandon is a great guy, and we've spent a bunch of time together. I think it's a great project. It's obviously it's different, but it's he's also kind of looking for the poetry out there.
Again, it's about valuing the details of people's lives, right, and from that, figuring out ways to support people and help them. In the case of healthcare, in a particular way, but loved ones have their own way of doing that and delivering that sort of support. Do you have another short one? Just one.
Yeah, you know what? I actually
get in trouble, but you go ahead.
I have. I don't know how to go backwards. Okay.
They can probably go backwards.
So you know what? I want to play like
they're going backwards here.
Yeah. So go backwards and backwards and backwards and backwards. So I just want to play when you're talking about go back a little bit.
One more.
One more. One more.
One more.
So I'm going to do another audio story, and I just want to. I just was when you were just talking, it made me think of this story, and just because I think that the listening and the talking and the gratitude goes both ways, and I know that not only not only is it hard to find the time to listen, that it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and being with patients, and you forget about the impact that you're having on patients' lives. So this is a story I don't play that often, but I'm going to play now. And a lot of times StoryCorps is about going back and finding people you want to thank in your life and thanking them, and this is one of those stories. This is Marcella Gaviria, and she was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma when she was 7. And since the age of 12, she's been cared for by her doctor, Dempsey Springfield, who's done countless surgeries on her leg, and she brought her doctor to StoryCorps to thank him.
I think you started taking care of me when I was 12.
You were in the hospital to have a bone transplant.
I was pretty scared, I remember. And I think I survived a very sort of traumatic moment because you were so kind. What I remember about you were your bow ties. You just looked like such a Southern gentleman, and you'd show up every morning with such a big smile, and you were so warm and gentle, and I wanted to get better for you. I wanted your surgery to work on me.
I really enjoy taking care of patients. That's probably what came across.
Well, I'd hate to count the amount of times you've operated on me, but every scar in my leg, I think, has something to do with you.
Well, I keep moving and you keep following.
Because I don't trust other doctors as much. And it's funny because when I was a kid, I would complain all the time about how I'd never get married.
I remember very distinctly, we would have conversations about this.
Yeah, because, I always wondered how difficult it would be for someone to sign up to my life. Well, I got married this year, and I wanted you to have the first dance. And that was just a way of celebrating the fact that a lot of what I'm able to do nowadays is because of your care.
Your wedding's the first wedding of a patient that I've ever gone to. So it's so rewarding to see that all of that, getting up before the sun comes up to get to the hospital pays off. It wasn't squandered.
Well, I have a great surgeon that really cared to get it right. It's a beautiful thing. Thank you for doing all you did.
So just to remind us that listening goes both ways.
Yeah.
That it's not only for the patients, but it can be incredibly valuable to the caregivers as well.
Well, Dave, I say thank you so much for being here, and
Thanks,
thank
John.
you for reminding us that we need to take the time to listen and to value those stories. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother.
Take care, brother.
Okay.
Yeah.